just letting the last individuals into the meeting lobby. I want to say on behalf of OmniAgile Consulting, welcome to everyone that is joining us. It is an absolute privilege to be here this evening. This is our last open source training session for 2021. As an organization, we are very grateful to each of you for being contributors to our ecosystem of equitable impact and difference making in our ecosystem and in our community. Without us participating and engaging in the manner that we have throughout the year, we would have not been in the privileged position to be able to present these sessions month on month. And I also want to, on the offset, actually say thank you very much to the team. There's a lot of work that goes in the background. But for us as an organization, it is really imperative to give back and to share and to create a forum for us to have engaging conversations. This evening, I have the privilege to be the moderator for what is going to be a very engaging panel conversation on equity, inclusion and transformation. So thank you very much for joining me this evening. Grab your cup of coffee, or in some cases, supper. I'm sure some of us are already having dinner. And let's get started. I think for me, one of the key aspects is when we look at the United Nations and they talk about sustainable development goals, I'd like to highlight 3 key goals that they refer to. Goal 4, which is quality education. Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And 10 is reduce inequalities. So for us, if we just look at that from a global context point of view, globally we have our work cut out for us. We don't sit with unique challenges within South Africa alone. And for those of our guests that is from the global community, we want to say welcome. And we want to open a dialogue and a conversation this evening. So if we just look at what we're going to cover this evening, our panel discussion is going to look at the human capital landscape. We're then going to move into the leadership minefield. We're going to look at some psychological contracting, and that is actually quite topical at the moment and being spoken about quite a lot, especially with the impact of COVID. And then we're going to look lastly at building talent density. It is our intent to ensure that we are finished by 7. If we do go over a minute or 2, we'll try and monitor that as best as we can. But just for some housekeeping, obviously to make it easy for engagement with the panel, we would like to ask that you remain on mute. If you've got questions, please make use of the chat box. I will monitor the chat box as we engage with our panel. And if there's any questions that we potentially, or any comments that we potentially don't get to this evening, you have our assurance that we will actually engage with you after the fact or address the statements or the questions thereafter. But for now, I'd love to introduce our panel. So if I can ask the panelists to please enable their cameras as well as their mics. I'm just waiting for Erica and Bafana. Bafana did have some challenges with regard to his computer. So if he's not on yet, we'll actually just get started. But the moment he does join us, we will obviously ask him just to introduce himself. So I'm going to not even introduce the esteemed panelists. I'm going to ask each of them to please introduce themselves. Again, I'm Lize Moldenhauer, Managing Director of OmniAgile Consulting, and it is my privilege to be the moderator this evening. So Kershini, I'm going to start with you first, and then we'll move over to Erica.
Sure. Good evening, Lisa, and good evening to the community that have joined us. So I basically am the executive head for transformation and strategy at Nedbank, but I also am on the coaching panel at Nedbank and a few other things as well. I sit on the board of the Community Trust, which basically looks at disbursements in the tertiary education and skills development space. And then I also represent the bank at the Banking Association of South Africa, and that's on the financial sector charter work group. And yes, I love to walk to clear my head, and I think I'll stop on that one. Thanks, Lize.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Erica.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you, and good evening, everybody. My name is Erica de Toit, and I am with the Western Cape Association for Persons with Disabilities. We are a provincial organisation with 25 branches in the Western Cape that provide direct service, mainly social development services to people with disabilities. My responsibility is awareness and sensitization, which is a bit about disability rights. It's about educating the public about disability and everything that goes along with that. So again, thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to pause a moment for Bafana because he's not with us yet. And the moment he does join us, Bafana has just joined us. Shame. So I'm going to put him on the spot just as he joins us. Bafana, are you online? And if you are, can you please enable your camera?
Hello, ladies. I'm about to do all of that. Just give me a second. Thank you. Technical gremlins this evening.
No, that's absolutely fine. If we were in a classroom, this would be part of the challenges that we just deal with. Yeah. So Bafana, just unmute yourself if you don't mind.
That's a lot better. Hello, Lisa. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Good to see all of you. It seems to happen every time we get together, the technical gremlins. But here I am and looking forward to this evening.
Awesome. So the ladies have had the opportunity to introduce themselves. So Bafana, may I ask you just to take a moment to share with our audience just a little bit of background who you are.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone that's on the call from all parts of the world, I understand. And thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful evening. As Lisa said, my name is Bafana Nhleko. I'm involved in rugby and involved at SA Rugby as the coach of the junior Springbok team, which is the SA Under-20 team, that is. But as per my other introduction, I'm a full-time father who dabbles in a bit of rugby and very curious about leadership and people.
Awesome. Well, I am very privileged to have all three of you with me this evening. So I'm going to get right into the meat or the heart of the conversation. And I think our biggest challenge that we have is when we look at the topic, and actually if we think about having it as a wrap-up conversation for 2021, it's like quite a big conversation to have at the end of a calendar year. But I think that it is quite imperative, because I don't think there's a start or a finish to this conversation. I think it is an evolving conversation when we look at equity, inclusion, and transformation. I don't think we will ever arrive or never have to talk about the subject, just because it is important when we look at diversity in people and workforce and engagement, that we actually engage everyone. And we need to, as leaders, work really hard on ensuring that happens. This evening, as you heard, we have three very diverse individuals with very diverse backgrounds when it comes to the topic. And they're going to look at it a little bit from their perspective, because that's part of who we are from an ecosystem point of view, is that it's not just about having like-minded thought processes. The polarization of thought allows us to consider somebody else's viewpoint, somebody else's perspective, and somebody else's environment and realities when they deal with certain things. So when we look at the human capital landscape, and specifically around equity, skills development, and economically active population, there is a requirement to create a foundation or a point of departure from which we look at it. So, Kershini, I'm going to ask you to start. So, I'm going to ask you to have a look at for us and share a little bit with us around the transformation lens through which you see equity, transformation skills, and EAP.
Thank you, Lisa. So because there are three variables, I will give you three different perspectives. But I will start off by just giving a very high-level definition of each one. So when I look at the economically active population, or EAP as we refer to it, it's really our labor force. So in the South African context, it's the total number of people between the ages of 15 and 64 who are willing and able to work. So that's very important. It's not only people who are working, it's willing and able to work. So as at July 2021, 28.5 million of people made up the EAP in South Africa. So you can already understand the issue that we have. So that's really EAP. If you look at equity, for me, it's simply about fairness or justice. And then if you look at transformation, it's really a distinct or marked change, either in form or nature or appearance. So if I look at the play on these three variables, perspective one for me is really a compliance or transactional perspective. So in this perspective, you will set equity targets, which will allow you to reach transformation targets, which will then allow you to reach your EAP targets. So it's a very target setting and compliance driven perspective. The second perspective is you can use these three variables to set an ambition. So in that case, equity, which is really about fairness and justice, will equal to transformation, which is really about a distinct change in the form or nature or appearance, and that will lead to an optimal EAP. So that's a very ambitious aspirational view. And then the last perspective for me is the execution perspective. Yeah. And that's where you're seeing these things as a verb. So the practice of equity plus the process of progression, which in my mind equates to transformation, will equal to a higher EAP. So it's really about looking at what is your perspective. Is it compliance? Is it ambition? Is it execution? And another way you can even look at it is, are you having a more transactional perspective or are you having a more transformational perspective? So the whole idea about these things is also to get from ambition to action. So it's really about how you see these things. And I guess it's about the context that each of us are operating in. Thanks, Lisa.
No, that's very true. And I love the way in which you've framed it when you look at, is it compliance? Is it your ambition, or is it actually execution? Or does it actually lead to that execution? Because it's great to have the ambition, but if nothing translates, it's like, you know, if you have a dream and you do nothing about it, it will remain a dream. And I think it becomes so important that when we look at that we actually make a decision, just like you framed it. What is our strategy? What is our foundation? What is the thing to which we are moving towards? And I love the fact that you call it a verb, because there's a doing part. It's work. It requires work, and it requires conscious effort and conscious work. And Erica, I now want to draw attention to you, because obviously your perspective is unique, and especially looking at people with disabilities. But when we look at this topic, and we now need to look at it from a quality perspective, what are your views on that?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes. Unfortunately, when it comes to transformation, specifically in the workplace, people with disabilities aren't really covered. Active transformation. They're covered by legislation, but it's putting that into practice. And there could be a few reasons for it. But in the workplace, we don't want equality, and it sounds very odd. You want equality before the law in terms of legislation. You want to be equal, but in the workplace and several other places, you want to be treated in an equitable manner. And so for us, the definition of equality is where everybody is treated the same, regardless of your needs or your individual differences. But equity is where everyone is provided with exactly what they need in order to succeed.
Yeah.
So if you want to be fair, then you can't look at just equality. You need equality in an equitable way. And the example that I often use to illustrate that is, if you want to treat everybody equally, you would give each person a pair of shoes. Each person gets a pair of shoes, everyone's equal. But if you want to be equitable in that equality, you give each person a pair of shoes that fits.
Yes.
And that's speaking directly to the person's individual needs. So now the equality indicators need to respond to disability, not just age and language and gender. Disability must be included. And PEPUDA, the Equality Act, does include disability. Unfortunately, we find in practice that it's not really enforced as much. But that's where we sit in terms of kind of the difference. I often say we don't want equality, we want equity. We want equality in an equitable way. So it is a little different. But I think even though it is for us specific to disability, it could be specific to any other demographic of the population. And all of us have different needs.
Yeah, and it's like, it's the E squared. So it's the doubling factor that actually comes into play there. And I think we, just on that, I do believe we actually have got our work cut out for us when it comes to this, and when it comes to managing people with disabilities, not just from a legislation, but what is the ethically correct manner in which to approach it and actually create inclusion within the workplace. How are we actually moving our workplaces towards allowing that inclusive relationships with people with disabilities for longevity and sustainability?
Add that, while the legislation is great, and we use legislation to make a point, we don't want people to include people with disabilities because the law says they must. We want them to do it because it is the 100%. Right thing to do. And 100%. Everybody is diverse and everybody needs a fair chance.
It just needs to be, it should be the right thing.
Yes, you'd think so.
Yes, but Bafana, that now brings me to you. And I'd love to hear, because obviously from a sports perspective, equity is very, it's a different topic of conversation when it's if it's just the workplace, if we can put it that way. And also to look at, when we look at economically active population from a sport, from a career point of view, and if you can share some of your views and opinions where that is concerned.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lize. I think there's two things that spring to mind for me, and the first one is sports is divided into two. You get mass participation, where you want to have access to resources for every single person, and it's quite great equality or equity if not everyone's got the same resources. And Erica made a very great example, obviously referring to people with physical impairments. And the second part of that is high performance, where people are not performing from a remuneration perspective or being involved in a professional element. Again, that's partly access to resources, but it's also access to opportunities. And I think if you really, be it business or sports, those two go hand in hand. Building sports facilities, that's good, and creating opportunities. If you're building sports facilities, that's fantastic. But if those sports facilities aren't exactly leading to opportunities or dealing with other social issues, then you're not really achieving anything. And unfortunately, I think we probably have some of those challenges within our country. But the biggest thing for me is to understand from a mass participation point of view, which is a social issue more than anything. The benefits of children playing sports, children having access to resources, sports resources, that is. They count. Many examples have shown the difference it makes in communities. However, the second part of that is for those that have got a desire to probably participate in sports at a higher level or have showed the ability to participate in sports at a higher level, what opportunities do they have? And hence the idea of equality and equity, because equality could mean it's open to everyone.
Yeah.
But equity is everyone able to get that opportunity to be there?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
and that's where we are with sports, really. It's about trying to close those two gaps and make sense of the two.
Correct. And I think it's also when we look at it in Bafana, you will know far better than what I would, but it's also understanding that there's a holistic approach. So there's a physical game, but there's also a mental game. And even when we give access, is being able to look at the whole person. So when we look at the socioeconomic construct and challenges that we face, it's looking at what are some of the mentoring potential components that needs to sit with the youngsters wanting to participate in sport. It's just like when we look at, from Erica's perspective, reasonable accommodation. We've got to look at the more holistic viewpoint and not necessarily just a narrow view and a narrow approach when it comes to access and equity and equitable access.
Yes, you're so spot on with regards to that. And there's, again, countless examples in sports where talent just gets you in the door. I mean, I think we've all heard that saying. It's just really a gateway to everything else. But if somebody's got other challenges, be they social challenges, be they mental challenges, because part of being able to perform at at an elite level, and regardless of the profession, be it business or sport, I think your support system, be it food, be it the ability to get to training on time, be it the ability to access medical assistance, and sometimes it might be things in and around mental. I don't want to use the word mental toughness, but
yeah.
I'm trying to find the right word around that.
Maybe mental agility.
Well, I love that, exactly. So again, if you take those things into consideration, are we doing enough by just providing facilities? There's so much more, and it's an ecosystem. Again, I link it to Erica's point. You want equality in an equitable way, which means you actually have to cater for all the other things. I don't want to jump on your line here, Erica, but building ramps sometimes is just not enough. It doesn't mean that you've included people by just building ramps. The same applies to just building stadiums or building sports centers. It's really engaging and understanding what is required to allow people to be their best selves, and for the organization too.
100%. And I think, Kershini, when you mentioned the verbs, sorry, I'm going back to it because I liked it. It's about the doing component. It's not just about the strategy. It's not just about the thought. It's not just about the policy, but it's how we integrate it, that it becomes practically applied within the context so that there's true sustainability within the process. And that now brings me, we have some comments. I'm going to come back to them in a moment. So I'm not ignoring all the guests. We're going to get back there now. But I want to just share something from the World Economic Forum as we move into the next topic, which is the Leadership Minefield. And the World Economic Forum, and I'm happy to share the link because this is actually the Future World of Work report that was done at the end of 2020. Company leaders can ensure the success of workforce strategies by directing the transition of employees with empathy, within the rule of law, in line with company values and culture, by ensuring outcomes are equitable, and by directing learning to effective resource and meaningful curricula. As an overarching principle, business leaders need to place equity and diversity at the heart of their talent ecosystem, ensuring that employees believe in their capacity to prosper based on merit. And for me, so the report is very detailed. It's actually a very long report and it breaks it down per country, and it's really worthwhile as a read. So I will put it as a hyperlink in the chat at the end of our session. But it is just important when we look at it, we have a leadership accountability and responsibility, and that's not necessarily easy. Leadership is not necessarily easy, especially with topics like this, and especially when it's complex, because it's not a linear process. There's so many elements that actually contribute to something to be successful and to be sustainable in the long run. So Bafana, I'm back at you. What are some of the existing challenges and hot pulse aspects for leaders in the current climate?
Look, Lize, I think it all starts with leadership, and we can never run away from that. And as you rightly said, that there's no straightforward way, but I do believe conversation and engaging around the challenges is definitely it's a good starting place. And then in and around that, it's obviously we're now in intergenerational times. We're also dealing cross-culturally in terms of all of those things. And I think at the beginning here, Kershini touched on it. Policy is there, but policy is not enough if we're not engaging with it, if we're not really truly understanding. And from a sporting point of view, one of the things I've learned over time is, you have to love them to lead them. And I know maybe the business environment doesn't always allow for that, but I think having a good understanding of people through caring for them and understanding their context, really opens up a different avenue from a leadership perspective. And that doesn't mean we drop our standards. That doesn't mean we have different expectations. It just means by really having a good conversation as a starting point and grappling with the issues for what they are. Again, it's not about ticking a box from a policy perspective.
Yeah.
I really believe it's such a powerful thing. And sure, for most leaders, it's not an easy thing, because you also open yourself up and you're vulnerable to some extent.
Yeah.
But again, if we don't really understand the people we're working with, and if they don't really know that we do care for them in the right way, how do we then get the best out of them? And how do we become a company that's performing at an optimal level?
Yeah, 100%. And I love the analogy, love them to lead them. And yes, it's difficult. We don't always like them, but we have to love them, because there is a care we have to have for our people. I know I quote this, and I've had in previous sessions. I love quoting Jack Ma, the ex-CEO of the Alibaba Group, where he says we're going to need a new type of leader, a more ethical type of leader. And that is so true. We actually need heart as we move forward. And as we engage with our people, we need to understand it's not just about systems and processes in business. One of the core components in business is people. And for a business to be successful, a business is successful because of the people it has. It's not just successful because of great product or great system or great procedures. It needs a really good balance and a good mix. And that's why we have to love them to lead them. And I think it's, and that is beautiful, Bafana. And that brings me, Kershini, to maybe a harder question in this, because if we look at the whole work from home, remote, work from anywhere based on our workforce, what is your opinion with regard to it being the multi-generational and fluid, and what do you believe is going to be the impacts?
Yeah, so I think, thanks, Lize. It is a tough one, but unfortunately, it's real. It's what we are all, we talk about the verbs. We all are experiencing it. We're in it. We're doing it. So I think one of the first things for me, beyond the EQ, which is the empathy and the emotional quotient that you talked about, I think it's really about the adaptability quotient, or AQ, that's coming more and more to the fore now. So how do all of us be agile? So when you talked about mental agility, yeah, it's obviously something that's very, very important. So when you build on that concept and you look at the adaptability quotient, it's really what's going to make the difference between being excellent or extinct in this modern workplace that we're talking about. So obviously, like for many companies, what we're doing is we're looking at refreshing our EVPs or employee value propositions towards digital, but in a manner where it will still enable productivity, it will still empower your staff, and of course, it has to improve profitability, because without money, there's nothing else that you're going to really be doing, you know? So I think this constitutes like a huge mind shift, which really no longer should look at a workplace, but we're now looking at a workspace. And what does that look for you? And we're no longer talking about the place of work, but we're talking about your purpose of work. So these are some of the things that we are shifting. And when we're engaging with staff, it's really, this whole EVP is propelled by people as well as technology. So it's really about this hybrid and blended model that we're looking at. So it includes multiple things. So one, it's really about funding. If you look at companies like Google and Twitter, they would be giving employees a certain amount of money to set up at home. If you look at other companies, they might be only giving you an allowance for, let's say, fiber and 3G. But now in a workplace, you also have occupational health and safety requirements. So those are some of the things you have to now convert and port into going into a workspace, because are you now going to give each employee a fire hydrant to make sure that their home space or workspace is safe? So we obviously have to update policies. We obviously have to look at updating our practices to support this new thing about working from home. And, you know, in Mama and Erica, it's like when we're talking transformation, it's not about the chameleon. We don't want you to just adapt the color of your skin when you put into another environment. We're actually talking about the butterflies, where the caterpillar changes into a butterfly, and then how do you actually make that shift and work? So I think you touched on it a bit. So very importantly, leadership. We no longer need the autocratic leadership. We need human-centered leadership. And that fundamentally includes things like empathy, but it also includes things like having more of a execution bias. But you still need to be able to allow people to fail. And then that's where the piece on inclusion comes in. So whatever your EVP is, it has to consider inclusion and how you do that. So what we're also doing, Lize, because very importantly, we need to listen. And listening now is not just literal, it's also figurative. So when you're listening through your pulse surveys and things like that, what's actually coming up? So the reality, or one of the realities now, is that burnout is really being increased to a huge degree. So what we also do is we look at WPI, which is workplace intelligence. And that really comes from some of the Microsoft analytics tools. So for example, over 6 months, 55% of time was spent on recurring meetings. And these include things like status updates, or bloated meetings, or lengthy meetings. So you can just imagine the fatigue that comes from that, which then also leads to the burnout. And that doesn't even consider the mental stress that people are feeling, or the well-being aspects. So in a nutshell, what we're also doing is we're trying to see how can technology enable people better. So this Viva Insights from Microsoft, for example, will actually look at your behavior, let's just say, in terms of how you're interacting with Microsoft. And it'll give you some suggestions on how you can book some focus time, how you can collaborate in a different way, how you can reduce bloated meetings, and so on. So one of the key things is really about inculcating the required, not the desired. It's no longer about the desired culture, it's about the required culture. What is now required for us to be able to work in this new world that we're living in? And then that's where, of course, the thread of, again, equity, transformation, inclusion comes in. And then perhaps just the last point, you know, we've all heard about work-life balance, work-life integration. People are now talking about that now, work-life integration. So it's no different from the physical world in the virtual world. The problem is now that the lines are more blurry, it becomes even more difficult to get this work-life integration going on. So that is why, like, what we also need to be looking at, and what companies are looking at, is like, some will call it no meeting afternoons, or some will call it Step Back Wednesday, or some will call it time to think. But it's really about flexing that EVP so that you can actually enable people to work.
And I think you've described it very beautifully, but it is being more humanistic and understanding the diverse needs that's now coming out of a very different working environment and a required working environment. And understanding that as a business or as an organization, we need that intelligence to also make policy adjustments. And the best way to do it is to ask the people, to engage them. Because they're living it, they're sitting with those circumstances and those environments, and for them to share how they would best want to see how it potentially works really becomes important. And I love the fact that you spoke about listen. It's so important. And it's listening with intent, listening to understand and not answer or throw policy or say, no, we've come up with a new rule book on how we work from home type of thing. It is actually looking at it more inclusively. And just the last comment, and Bafana, I can see you, and if you want to comment, please do. But just, do you believe it's here to stay, work from home?
Oh, from me, Erica? Sorry, Lize. No. So I think that there will definitely be a blended or a hybrid model, because in some functions, you will need the guys to go back to work. So I think for me, we do now have the benefit of hindsight. So in the past year and a half, you can already get a sense of which functions need you to physically be at the office. And sometimes it's for a reason, like, for example, people on our trading desk. Well, it will be difficult for them, to work from home. Or if you still need people to come into a branch, it will be difficult for them to continue to work from home. So I think it's definitely about a blended model, but definitely skewed towards more remote work than actually coming into the office. Yeah.
Very much so. And Bafana, from your side, are you going to coach people from home?
Unfortunately, the remote working, we try, and I must say, with COVID and the changes, it's actually changed our world quite a bit, because there's certain engagements that we had in the past whereby, we'd come in, we'd have meetings, we'd want to discuss things with players, and with the new generation, they're on their phones 99% of the time. They've got their laptops with them, and there's enough software to actually share information with them where they can prepare outside of the team environment. And then we still need to come in because we're in the physical game, so we have to train and get together. And again, I mean, if you're not together, the difficulty is the team chemistry.
100%.
But the one thing I just wanted to touch on was, and I think Kershini mentioned how I keep going back to this word of engagement. Sure, the leader needs to set the tone and the vision, etc. But you'd be surprised if you asked most of the people that are in a team or work in a business. I mean, everyone wants to. Most people, let me say, not everyone. Most people want to do well. So therefore, the idea of a culture is really about engaging the team around you, because those people are the culture, their way of doing things, their way of behavior. So if everything is imposed out of policy, and we do need policy, but if everything is imposed out of policy, then the buy-in is lacking.
Yeah, 100%.
And of course, with getting people to, I guess the question is, what type of environment would you like to be in? What type of workplace would you like to be in? And you'll be surprised at some of the good things you'll get. And then you can also throw it back to the employees to say, well, if we are going to go that route, if we're going to meet each other halfway, what are the responsibilities and what is our accountability that's now needs to be put on you? And the ownership, it's a shared ownership. It's a shared ownership model. And out of that, really, you get people that start getting the best out of them, because ultimately they came up with the ideas and they start keeping a check on their teammates, etc. And I just think it's taking too long for us to get to that point from a leadership perspective, where we're sitting with people and saying, what culture do we want to foster as a group? What does inclusion mean? Transformation doesn't have to be purely based on race or color or gender. What is transformation? Because we all need to transform as individuals.
100%.
And the more of that, because as soon as people have that picture, or maybe they have a different picture to what you have, I think it really sets a good platform to probably take your organization to the next level.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more. Erica, and from your perspective, how do we create inclusion in these new working models?
Well, I think, Lisa, that exactly what we've been speaking about now, dialogue, interaction, discussion, listening is crucial. And particularly in a workspace, and I say workspace very intentionally because there has been this shift now in the last while to working remotely, which is exactly what many people with disabilities have been begging for years and years and years.
Yes.
And have been told, you have to come into the office. And that creates a huge amount of challenges and disabling environments for them. But inclusion is about respecting diversity without those restrictions and limitations. And so it's a change from the individual that must change to suit the environment, to the environment, the system that needs to change to suit the individual. So in other words, society has to change to accommodate the diversity. And so now we're not looking anymore at about how special people are with special needs. We're looking at the nature of society and the ability society has to respond to a wide range of individual differences and needs. And those are specific needs. So something that I also use to illustrate this is oftentimes people think, but people with disabilities are looking for special treatment in the workplace or favoritism, and it isn't like that at all. It's each individual has their own specific need. For example, smokers have a specific need to stop every now and again and have a smoke. And that's an accommodation that has now been included into legislation. But the minute you say, someone that is perhaps using a wheelchair needs a half-hour break in the middle of the day to get out of his wheelchair to prevent secondary health complications, then there's this idea, but he's not putting in as much work as we are. When in fact, you take that individual out of the workplace and put them into their own space, that negates that whole need for that accommodation. So I do think it is also around understanding each individual and their needs, and the only way you can do that is by discussing with them. Something that we as an organization also do is sensitivity training, because employers need and team members need to know how to be sensitive to disability. You need to know what is the impact of that person's impairment on their life and how they function, so that you can accommodate them in the workplace.
100%. I think I love our conversation, and I'm so conscious it's already 6:45 and we've still got so much to talk about. But yeah, I think when I just listen to your viewpoints and how you sharing things, there's this beautiful saying that goes, comparison is the death of joy. And when we look at the workplace, a traditional workplace, we created a standardized approach to measure performance, and we sometimes measured performance at a very linear level, nearly task-based. And I think with everything that's happened now, we are evolving, and a lot of workplaces evolving to look more at output. It's about what is being produced at the end of the day. It's the ultimate performance. It's the ultimate goal. And the creativity, the innovation, the different ways of potentially producing the output is being more embraced by workplaces and organizations, because they see that as contributing to a creative and innovative way of actually achieving outcomes. And I think it becomes so important for us to look at that, because that allows for people to have different environments or working environments The output is still what's driven, but how they get there. If they are needing to work between, obviously depending on the type of work and if it allows it, but if they are optimal at night, but they're still producing the outcome that is required, then why not? And I think that flexibility and that process is how businesses are maturing and moving forward. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And that brings us into our next point of conversation, which is the whole psychological contracting within the workplace. And I personally love this topic. I'm a little bit biased, and I'm declaring it. I'm being very honest. And I think it is so important when we look at it. So again, the World Economic Forum released a report in June 2020 on diversity, equity and inclusion 4.0. Happy to share it as well. And in section 3, they talk about the economic imperative. And they speak about the advantages of diversity, equity and inclusion. And some initial learnings by managers from the case study that they did. And they write here that to reap the full competitive advantage, some initial learning efforts by managers, employees, and the whole organization might be required. But a wide range of research conclusively documented that well-managed, diverse teams, Bafana, goes back to what you said, diverse in all aspects, significantly outperform well-managed, homogeneous teams. And they outperform them on profitability, 25 to 36%, innovation of 20%, decision-making of up to 30%, and employee engagement, statistically significant relationships with engagement and retention from all employees. And for me, that was quite profound because it leads to how do we create those working environments? And I'm actually going to ask Bafana for some of your thoughts on psychological contracting when it comes from a sporting perspective.
Sure, those are amazing stats, Lize. And, you know, the idea of psychological contracting, I mean, again, the more I've thought about it when we had discussions, it comes back to that context of the individual, context of the organization, because what you're ultimately trying to do is build trust between yourself and that person. And part of that trust, it's not a qualifier, but I do believe we think of these type of things as the softer skills, and maybe people, they're open to abuse, which they possibly are. However, in the majority of cases, you're bound to be more on the right side than the wrong side. When you're sitting with somebody saying, so what are your expectations? What are your beliefs? What are your values in this? And what can I do to get the best out of you? So the conversation changes from this is what the company does and you're either in or you're out type of situation. It's more around getting the individual to almost self-actualize within the organization in itself.
100%.
And that also means I need to be trusted.
Yes.
But being trusted means that I work in a certain way. I've got certain characteristics. Does the person that's managing me or dealing with me understand that? Because a blanket approach to everyone doesn't work. It's needed at some times, but it doesn't work. Some people prefer, and we're in a team environment. So at halftime when things aren't going well, sometimes harsh words are needed, but more often than not, some guys just need to be on the edge all the time, and you need to keep them there because that's the only way they can perform optimally, and they're honest enough about that. Some guys don't enjoy, or girls don't enjoy it when they're getting, approached, publicly in front of their teammates. So there's a different conversation around that. And we all have different reasons why we're at work, which is also important to understand. Yes. And sometimes you don't get around to that, to understanding people from that perspective. Look, it takes time. It's not an easy thing to do. Kershini, I'm sure you'll agree here. It takes time. It's not an easy thing to do. And managers or leaders have got a lot on their plate as well. But if one really looks at the current generation, I think we call them millennials, that they're different. They want to engage. they've got ideas, and so from that perspective, if you're not opening up that space for them, they want to ask questions, and to some degree they're ambitious at a fairly, quite quickly, which is again not a bad thing. But if you're not building that trust to say, well, within our environment, I know this is where you want to go. This is how we can help you get there. And I do believe that's quite big. I remember there was I'm going on here. There was a thing called the Tour of Duty. I did some research on that, which is about how do you take an employee through their own journey within the company. And I do believe if you're starting to get that, that's when you get people being good for them, not only just for themselves, but good for the company. And ultimately, that's a kind of employee that I think we'd all want to be associated with.
And ultimately good for society.
For sure. So the trust thing, the trust from the leader or the manager, but trust takes time. It's a relationship. It's about listening, as Kershini mentioned, to the other person. And the more you get around to those type of contracts outside of the legal contracts, I think you're really getting onto something. Last point, we can pay a player all we want. We can really pay him whatever we want. But if we don't really get to the core of what makes him perform, regardless of his talents, we will never get the best out of him. And that's really the simplicity of sports. And corporate always goes, yeah, but we pay them X amount, so therefore we demand X amount. Fairly true, but I do think you got to get to the person. Thank you.
100%. And Erica, what are your views with regard to, just like Bafana shared now, he spoke quite a bit around the trust economy and building a trust economy within psychological safety, but do employees stay because of leaders, which creates a culture of safety, inclusion, and fair opportunity?
It depends on the leader. People with disabilities specifically leave companies when there's no sensitivity for their own condition, their own impairment, and the way that it impacts their life and their work life. That leads to a lack of understanding on the part of the employer on how to accommodate that person. You get this break in communication where there is no dialogue, there's no interaction, and it then within the company becomes this culture of discrimination and victimization even. And as much as everyone wants a job, you don't want to work in a toxic environment. And unfortunately, there is a sense sometimes that companies, specifically when it comes to disability, they have a one-size-fits-all strategy, or they focus on a single need for a single kind of impairment. I think Bafana mentioned it earlier about, if you've got a ramp at the front door, you're fine, and you're not at all. Because even within disability, there is diversity. So lighting in a boardroom setting for someone who uses a sign interpreter is very different to another employee that needs sufficient lighting in order to lip read.
Yes.
So yes, people don't stay around, but again, this is where that sensitivity comes in, where you treat each individual on the basis of their strengths. And I've met so many people with disabilities who just cannot find employment because places are predisposed to stereotypes and to misperceptions around what they think that person can accomplish. And it's irrelevant what their CV says. So I would really say organizations and companies that are inclusive and that are safe spaces are where people will want to be employed. And even current employees don't want to disclose, especially psychological impairments. So many times I've had employees come to me afterwards and say, I want to chat to you about this. and 9 out of 10 of them have got some kind of psychological impairment, but they do not want in their workplace to disclose that, because they've already picked up that there is this discrimination going on, and so then they leave. Yeah.
100%, and that is actually really sad, because the stigma attached to something sometimes is what makes circumstances really difficult for individuals. And it should be better to be transparent. It should be better to be able to say, hey, this is me. These are some of my challenges. I might need help, but when I'm here, I'm 100% committed, and these are the challenges, but we don't. And especially when people are struggling with things. And, you know, I think that, and this is just a personal comment, I just think as society as a whole, you know, we fail people because we put people in boxes. We say when a person is not like me, then, you know, they're not good, or they don't fit into my bias, my little box. And for me, that's just really sad, because we can learn such a lot from each other, and there's so much contribution that can be made from individuals, and to exclude such a big part of our society is just really, really sad. So Erica, thank you very much. I think we have a lot of challenges when it comes to people with disabilities, and a lot that we can do much better and much more effectively with. But I think that's just all of us in the ecosystem needing to contribute and actually work together. And Kershini, that brings me to, how does psychological safety, all of this trust economy, the things that we are speaking about, Bafana and Erica referred to now, actually impact talent acquisition and retention from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Erica. So as I'm just listening to the panel, I was also just reflecting on psychological safety itself was coined by one of the Harvard Business School professors. And the way she defined it at the time is that it's a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So if you think about that, it's really talking about a shared belief that the team itself is going to feel safe to take risks. Yeah. So when you translate that into talent acquisition, retention, etc., it does not mean being nice, but it's about being respectful. And obviously, as Bafana alluded to, you cannot have respect without trust as a foundation. And we are facing a trust deficit as a country, not just even in, you know, corporate South Africa. So that really means we have to translate this and appreciate all aspects of diversity. So we have to embrace this devoid of fear. So it needs to be accepting of thought, of culture, of race, of gender, of age, of socioeconomic status, physical disabilities, religious beliefs, and all of these things in totality. So certainly there's a definite correlation, because fear as a variable will inhibit equality, inclusion, and transformation. And if you have fear, it will obviously then inhibit your ability to acquire and retain talent, especially diverse talent, because that's what we're really talking about here. And then I also reflected on another piece of research that was done, which is actually very interesting for all of us to reflect on, because it was by Dr. Timothy Clark, and it talks about the 4 stages of psychological safety. And actually, these are a progression. So stage 1 is about inclusion safety, because that's your basic human need for connection and belonging. And then stage 2 is about learner safety, or if that's how you want to call it. And that's saying that the person is satisfied with the need to learn and grow. And then you move on to contributor safety, which is saying the person is able to contribute by utilizing their skills and abilities. And then the last one is challenger safety, which means that the person is able to challenge the status quo. In other words, challenge leaders in the organization. So if you just look at those 4 stages and reflect on it, you want to actually get to challenger safety, because that's really the ultimate, or the nirvana state. But some of us are probably even still straddling in stage 1, which is inclusion safety. Because some people will tell you that they don't actually feel safe. They don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they can connect. So it's a very interesting topic, you know, and I think the fact is, like you also alluded to earlier on, there's much research that's been done. Even the Gallup report, if you look at it, will tell you organizations that increase psychological safety will actually have more engaged employees in their workplace. And I think it's about a 12% increase in productivity. So all of these things, you know, are really connected. And ultimately, talent is an organization. An organization doesn't exist without talent. So when you talk about talent and retention and psychological safety, it's almost like two sides of the same coin. You cannot talk about the one without speaking about the other. So I'll leave it there, Lisa.
Well, you created a beautiful link into the last thing that we need to talk about, and that is talent density. So for me, I'm going to use exactly what you said now, so thank you very much. And I am, Kershini, going to start with you, and I'm asking all three of the panelists your opinion on our final question of this evening. And in your opinion, considering what you just said, how would we go about building an economic pool of talent?
Yeah, so I think in my mind, Erica, it will have to link back to the skills gap, okay? So let's just say you're starting at the skills gap. So the skills gap will tell you where we're really struggling in terms of different types of skills. So if we look at technical skills, it's really about the data scientists, the analysts, the coders, and all of that. If you look at cognitive skills, it's about the creative thinking, the agility, the metacognitive, learning to learn. Learning to learn is very important, else we become extinct. Dealing with complexity. Yes. And then if you perhaps look at, maybe I'll call it the last bucket, social skills. That's really about your empathy and the respect and the love the person that Bafana was, you know, talking about earlier on. So skills should actually drive what is required for this talent pool, if you want to consider it like that. So in a nutshell, for me, it's really about saying, look at the skills, but not only the gap. Because when you have a, let's just call it a plan or a talent management framework, it's not only about the gap or the development needs. It's also about how then do you harness and leverage the strengths. And I think that's where you then get the mentors coming in, and where you try to bridge the gap between, you know, the new generation that we talk about and the older generation. And how do we really actually help create the supply and demand from that perspective? So how do we make the economics work by looking at both? So I think you have to adjust the gap, but at the same time, you need to harness the wisdom of the older guys that are leaving, because often it's creating a different type of gap.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's also, as we move over to Erica and ask her for her opinion, it's also very important managing and looking at the skills gaps, not just for now, but what the future will require, and keeping up to speed and creating opportunities for closing the gaps that potentially we don't even know is going to exist. And that in itself, from a leadership point of view, becomes really challenging, and just mapping those skills. And especially with you know, all the huge challenges when it comes to digital transformation and digital challenges, and the talent density that's required for that from a future world of work. So Erica, from your opinion, how do we close this gap and make sure we've got a strong economic pool of talent? Oh, you're on mute, Erica, sorry.
Sorry, I got carried away. Yeah, when we're speaking about education, you know, before we even go into the workplace, there is a tremendous gap for children with disabilities, even up to tertiary level.
Yeah.
And that's a discussion on its own. But if there is this lack of space for people with disabilities in the workplace, then there's no incentive to even get a proper education if they could, or a tertiary education. And so we have this thing called learnerships, and people with disabilities use those. And you know, initially we thought this is great because it is about skills development. There is a little bit of a stipend added to it, and they will become employable in whatever aspect.
Yeah.
But the employment is still not happening. And so we find people just regurgitate through learnerships, and we call them professional learnership goers, because if you're not getting an employment, then you use learnerships as a way of getting an income. But learnerships don't mean anything unless there is the prospect of fixed gainful employment at the end of it. So, you know, in informal training, I personally always say employ the passion, teach the skills. So things like mentorships, over-the-shoulder training, where you have someone that has the basic skills required for the job, but you're able to focus directly on them, taking all their individual specific needs into consideration, but then just modify them or adjust it towards the individual. That, for me, is the way to go. But that's not on large scale. That is with individuals within a company, and it certainly doesn't solve the education gap that exists.
100%. And I think we definitely have a lot of work cut out for us to create sustainable job opportunities for people with disabilities. We have a lot of work that needs to be done there. And Bafana, from your perspective, specifically from a sporting point of view, I know your views might be slightly different.
Well, I'd like to think that there's lots of cross-correlations between sports and business. And Carol Dweck speaks of a growth mindset.
Yes.
And for me, in terms of talent density, because there are people that are naturally talented, but it's also, it's relative, because we might be good at two things, maybe lacking in something else. And it's not to ignore what you're good at, but it's almost trying to create a good balance in terms of organizations or sports teams require. And, you know, the biggest thing that I keep thinking about is almost moving from the me to the we, and then keep the back and forth between that. Because there's an element of, okay, what do you need and how does that contribute to the team? What else can we give you that makes the team better, and vice versa? So again, the organization grows, yet the individual also grows in different ways. And again, the other thing is talent is, you know, it differs from time to time, because we might need talent for now. I think Kershini mentioned the skills gap. We need to look for talent. What do we need for now? But also, what are we doing to build for the future? And as well, what might that look like? So, and finding the balance between that, you know, so the schooling method works, just different ways, but we also know that people learn differently. That's also an important one to understand. How can we understand how people learn?
Yes.
So that the best out of them. So mentorships are good. Some people are more visual. Some people are more, you know, let me go figure it out myself. And if we can tap into that as part of, you know, trying to, because you're not just trying to keep talent or increase it, but you're actually trying to enhance the talent that the person's got. What are his strengths? How can we enhance them? What are his areas that he needs to work on to be better as an individual and for the organization? And that, again, takes a lot of work, unfortunately, at all levels. But it ties back to my point about understanding the individual, building context into the performance measures, and really then zoning in on getting the best out of that person.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more. And I think being flexible enough and creative enough from an environmental, leadership and organizational perspective to ensure that we actually meet the needs of individuals where their needs are, crafting that uniqueness around them, because people are different. And that brings me to the end of our session. And first of all, I just want to say to everybody, Thank you very much for allowing us to run over. So I do apologize that we have run over time. Also to the panelists, I do apologize. But I do believe it's very valuable conversation that we have had. And potentially, I know there was one comment to say, next time you must have it for 2 hours. So maybe we will take that feedback and say maybe next time this topic should be running over 2 hours. And as we wrap up, I would just like to ask each of the panelists, just like quick, in 10 seconds, what is the one thing you either want to encourage, challenge leaders to walk away with this evening? Kershini, you can go.
Thanks, Erica. So I think it's about synaptic pruning. So that's thought to be the brain's way of removing connections that are no longer needed. So for me, it's to challenge everyone to say, so what synaptic pruning do I have to do to be more inclusive as a leader? Thanks, Erica.
Awesome. Erica, you?
I would say see people for who they are and not who you think they are.
Yeah.
You know, give someone specifically disability now, give them a fair chance at an interview, give them a job offer, negotiate their reasonable accommodation, and if they cannot still perform the minimum requirements of the job, then they're not the right person for the job.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Bafana, from your perspective?
Thank you so much once again for this opportunity. And there's quite a few things that keep running through my mind. The first one is, transformation is about transforming the person and transforming the environment.
Yeah.
So we need to see it for that, as opposed to it being about optics and looking and trying to meet criteria. And that also leads me to my next thing of understanding that, even if we do transform, be careful of transforming for people that also think very similarly to you or to yourself, because then we're sort of including and we are transforming based on criteria. But what then tends that groupthink takes over.
Yes.
It's quite pointless if myself, Erica, Kershini, and yourself, Lize, are on the same panel. And in terms of criteria, we all look the part and we all tick the boxes. However, the organization can't move forward because it doesn't allow for certain conversations, and because we are all thinking exactly the same. So sometimes we just need to be careful that diversity, inclusion, and transformation don't end up working against us, in the sense that we hire people that look a certain way but are exactly in the same mindset from a thinking point of view. And
100%. Couldn't agree more.
I know it's quite complicated. Maybe love is a strong word, but I think genuinely caring for people goes in getting the best out of them.
Couldn't agree with you more. Love is a complex word, but it's a good word, because I think there's a lot to be said to actually love and care for somebody, because it does mean we look at people through different eyes. I said genuine love, not the values that we put up and never look at. 100%. It's got to be a verb, a doing thing, eh, Kershini? We've got to do it. And as leaders, we model those behaviors. We model it. People can see leadership. It's a physical act. It's not just words. And I think that becomes so important. And from my side, I want to say thank you very much to the panelists. You guys have been amazing. To everybody that's attended, thank you so much. I know we haven't, as a panel, monitored the chat, but you have our commitment that the two, actually 3 papers that we referred to, we will share with you the hyperlinks for everybody that's online. Secondly, if there's anything that we have missed, our team will work through it, and we will actually, as a panel, respond to it. So, and hopefully we'll get that out by next week. And lastly, I'm going to hand over to my team. And as we close the session this evening, we're going to leave you with something. And I will still be online, and I'm sure the other panelists will wait as well. So if there is maybe a question that you want to ask after this, then you're welcome to do so. But we're going to show you a video which is irrespective of our differences. All human beings have been created equal. The principle of equality is one that should transcend race, age, gender, religion, all of the above. So I'm going to hand over to Jade and the team now as they share the video link. Jade, are you guys ready? And then as a panel, we'll just remain online. So it will also give us an opportunity just to look at some of the comments. And then if there's any questions, we'll address it after this.
Equality. God once said, "Let us create man in our own image." An image painted with the same brush of love on a canvas of purity and strength, no different to the next. We are fed the same measure of faith. We find our salvation at the same cross. We breathe the same breath. We covered in the same skin, but we choose to see this world monochrome. We split black from white, poor from rich, introvert from extrovert. We are one mind, one body. No life is better than the next. Our intellect should not be determined by our backgrounds, even less so our speech. My English might be broken, but my mother tongue still reminds me that I am no less smarter just because my tongue finds itself in the confines of foreign speech. Equality reminds us that even though our drums beat differently, our hearts are still of the same orchestra, conducted by the same conductor, the same instructor. We read from the same sheet of music. We are meant to be in sync. But like every orchestra, not every instrument will make the same sound or play the same role, be heard or be seen. Just because all you hear are the violins does not mean the harp is less important, or the French horn, or even the triangle. Without them, there would be no orchestra. Equality is knowing that status makes no difference if we are branches of the same tree, fed by the same waters, connected to the same roots, our bodies the stem. We are forest in the Amazon of Christ. Our hearts tainted by forest fires of hate, caused by the bulldoze of ignorance, and struck by the lightning of racism. When will we learn that a rainbow is not one color? And when will we give true meaning to the term Rainbow Nation? When will we realize that the flesh that surrounds us are merely ghosts? You are not white, and I am not black. They are just labels put in place by society to place us in boxes. Equality teaches us that boxes, they're meant for shoes. Equality is the principle that reminds us we are all equal.
Thank you so much. That was a spoken word from Darren, a colleague of ours. Again, I want to say to all the panelists, thank you so much for your time. Apologies once again. I know I'm a stuck record for being over time. It's never our intent to run over time, but it's a broad conversation that we put an hour together for. So we are online. So for those of you that need to exit, enjoy your supper, enjoy your evening. For those of you that's in our time zone, for the rest of you that's not, it could be morning or afternoon, I've got no idea. If there's any questions, please just put it in the chat. We are online. We'll stay online until 12:30. Is that okay with the panelists? So if there's anything urgent, please share, and then we can quickly engage. Thank you very much, Lodine, for the feedback. Like I said, we will definitely read through all the comments. Is there any questions, burning questions that you would like to ask the panelists right now? Tina, I know that your hand was up. If you've got a question, you're welcome to type it.
I'm sorry, Lize, no, I think that was an accident. I'm battling here with my phone in my pocket. because I'm busy preparing supper while listening to you guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was most intelligent speech that I've learned today, and information that I gathered, because I'm recently from a political background, and what has happened there in the workplace was not so good in the end. Most of our presidents resigned.
Yeah.
So, and that was understandable about what has happened. So a lot of what you said tonight applied to our situation.
Awesome.
And I just want to say thank you for this interesting, and please include me in all the future meetings. And I hope that one day I can also give my 5 pence to you, if you allow me.
Awesome. No, thank you for the feedback. I think everybody appreciates that, and it's a good indication, because we're all part of a community, and we're part of an ecosystem and wanting to make a difference. And yeah, so thank you, Tina Bell, very much for the feedback. We appreciate it. And yeah, I don't know, any last comments, any last questions? We just want to say thank you for the feedback. We will read through it. We obviously have not had time because we were like talking through the session. So I'm going to say thank you very much for everyone. We're going to start exiting now. Have a blessed evening. And thank you very much. And Kershini, Bafana, Erica, again, huge thank you from my side. It was amazing, and I loved engaging. And who knows, maybe we have a follow-up session early in 2022, because I think there's a lot of conversations and a lot of lessons that we can learn from our environments, because we have very diverse environments. But there is cross-pollination, and because we're diverse, we are able to learn from each other and do better. And I think that's what we all want to do, is we want to do better so that our communities, our country can do better. So thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you, team, for all the support in the background, because I know there's been a lot of work. So we're going to exit now. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you, Lize. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Kershini.